this Willow Hall. So I would just like to mention here that in Willow, the first session is being chaired by Professor Vijayendra Goswami, former Vice Chancellor, Sunrise University, and it will be co-chaired by Dr. Subhash Chandra. And the participants there would be Navidinia, Shahid NP, Sheetal Singh, Ibrahim Ali, and Mr. Alexander. So if any one of you are here, I'll request you to proceed to Willow Hall. Similarly, Amrita Vishwanath Shenoy, Aziz Haider Saab, Emmanuel Ibn Yazid, Nanak Singh Nishtar, and Dr. Sudhish Narayan Singh. So they are also supposed to be in the Willow Hall. And the second session, and Dr. Padma Singh, Dr. Sudhir Narayan Singh and Dr. Padma Singh in the Willow Hall. Session 2 will be chaired there by Professor Satish Saxena and co-chaired by Dr. Chand Bharadwaj. Third session will be chaired by Dr. Ravi Bhatia and co-chaired by Dr. Surendra Pathak. Yes, so these are the announcements. I think so. Fine. Dipali Vinod, Ms. Ganga Devi Guru, Ms. Arbania Fitriania, and Dr. A.K. Merchant. Thank you, Sehgal sir. Another 5 minutes. Welcome to the. I know, because they are supposed to be there. No problem. So, welcome Professor Verma, welcome Mr. James. Thank you very much, Mr. Ingil Ra, Mr. Ayagocho, Vikram sir, Lele Saab, O.P. Sehgal Saab. Students of Alcon International School. Start. Yeah, this song was both in English and Hindi, and it is in the context of the lot of questions and apprehensions that were raised yesterday, that why are we asking the same questions for decades, and we are all wanting peace, and peace is not coming forward. So I think the hope and optimism and confidence, I think that is the only thing which will take us forward. So what these children have said in essence is, we shall overcome, and we shall overcome. And this is our deep belief, this is our deep conviction, and it is with this deep conviction that this is the next generation, and I am sure, who knows, the next generation can just as bring a surprise as they are doing in all other fields. So that is precisely what this song is about. We shall overcome. And this message of peace will prevail across the world. That is the conviction with which they sang this song. Mr. James. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. With this optimistic note and rendition, we are now into the fourth session of this two-day conference, Role of Women and Youth in Peace Building Process. Now this session will be chaired by a prolific speaker, a General, Major General Pramod Sehgal, retired as the CEO of Army Air Defense College. Post-retirement, he headed 2 NGOs in the field of education and disaster management. He has been working for the upliftment of children through a variety of workshops designed to improve their competitiveness and earning potential. He has been commended for his efforts by the erstwhile President, Prime Minister, several Chief Ministers, Spiritual Guru Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, and the Chinmaya Mission. Till date, he has counseled over, we call it 8 lakh, but for you, sir, 800,000 children he has already addressed. Thank you very much, sir. He has been the chief guest and a keynote speaker at several national and international seminars. And for the benefit of those who are present here, he is one of the key organizers and key drivers of this particular conference that we are currently through. So I request Major General Sehgal to please come and take your seat, and I will also call upon Dr. Muhammad Mansoor Alam Sahab, Professor Madhu Khanna, Dr. Hema Raghavan, Professor Deepali Bhanot, and Dr. A.K. Merchant also to take their seats. And my request to Ms. Ganga Devi Gurung and Albania Fitriania to take their seats on my right. This is just because of the little bit of adjustment problem that 2 of the speakers will be seated there. So this session will end at 11:30, and Major General Sehgal will distribute time as per his wish. Yes. Thank you very much. So by now it seems that there will be time.
Good morning. In the traditional Indian language, Namaskar wa Shubhkamnaएं. What an amazing way to start today's session on a note of optimism and positivity. My compliments for the wonderful song that was sung by students of Alcorn. I am very, very certain that the generation next will do to the world which our generations possibly failed to do. Distinguished panelists at the dais, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a privilege and a pleasure to speaking to such an illustrious audience. I am grateful to the Global Peace Foundation India, Interfaith Organization Foundation India, and ISI University for this honor. This session is primarily devoted to discussing the role of women and youth in peace building process. Since times immemorial, women have been the worst sufferers of all man-made or natural calamities. They have been ravaged, savaged, traumatized, and brutalized beyond description. The youth too have suffered enormously at the hands of all invaders and marauders. Either they have been enslaved and made to suffer extreme humiliation and indignities, or they've been simply put to slaughter. This is what happened in ancient times. The same was repetitively repeated during the medieval ages, and unfortunately was followed through during both the First and the Second World Wars, particularly on the Eastern Front. This is the same mantra that is today being followed through by ISIS. Slaughter the menfolk, exploit the women and the youth. What worries us is this unending human trauma, despite the fact that women constitute 49.5% of the human population and the youth another 25%. In other words, 75% of the world's population is at the mercy of the balance 25%, a majority of whom are essentially good, decent human beings. In several countries today, such as Ethiopia, Zambia, Senegal, Cambodia, Nepal, Colombia and Peru, an average of around 16% women between the ages of 15 and 19 have begun childbearing, are from the poorest sections of society. In Southeast Asia and West Asia, 18% women are married off by the age of 18. In Central Asia, 42%. In Western and Eastern Africa, the figure is as high as 38 to 41%. What is more worrisome is that majority of these are married off even before the age of 15. In countries like Kenya, Haiti, Nepal and Cambodia, up to 55% women and up to 47% youth even today suffer from HIV or AIDS. And despite rapid progress towards universal primary education in countries like Mozambique, Senegal, Lesotho, almost 50% children do not reach the secondary age. And as far as my neighbor Pakistan is concerned, up to 65% women are neither educated, nor trained, nor employed. And that is the reason for extreme dissatisfaction that continues to prevail in Pakistan as a nation. From the above, it is quite evident that areas ripe for attention stand fully identified. In fact, mankind was always aware of these. But no serious efforts were ever made to significantly address the same. It is only in the last decade that some initiatives and successful models have been tried out, especially in Africa. However, the effort is genuinely minuscule. Truly monumental efforts need to be made to integrate women and child, as they constitute over 70%, 75% of humankind. Mega initiatives concerning their education, health, poverty alleviation, gender inequalities, and empowerment need to be thought through replicated and scaled up across countries and continents to reduce the suffering of women and youth and lessen the exploitation, sexual and otherwise. Without such initiatives, no meaningful integration of women and youth in the peace-building process, our optimism in the next generation notwithstanding, would be feasible. Our panelists have participated in similar seminars in India and abroad by the dime. Unless we can convince the ruling dispensations in these countries across the globe, efforts of such conferences may not succeed in making any dent in remedying the trauma that women and youth are made to go through again and again and yet again. Alternatively, civil society, in conjunction with established religious orders that have global networks, must play a significant role in sensitizing the people of the world to ensure that women and youth get fully integrated in the peace-building process. Ladies and gentlemen, time is of essence. Globalization, social media and space-age media networks can help towards the same. I am sanguine that our esteemed panelists would enlighten us on the models and initiatives which have succeeded in involving and engaging women and youth in peace-building process across the globe. However, before I invite the panelists, I will request them to limit their presentations to a maximum of 8 to 9 minutes to allow for some questions at the end of all the presentations. Our first panelist this morning is going to be Professor Madhu Khanna. She is a visiting professor of Indic religion, Jamia Millia Islamia, Delhi. She obtained her PhD in Indology and Religious Studies from Oxford University in 1986 and is a historian of religion and a noted Tantric scholar. At present, she is a distinguished fellow in Asian Comparative Studies at the California Institution of Integral Studies, San Francisco. She has written several books and has contributed to 3 national projects and several research projects for the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts. Ladies and gentlemen, do give Professor Madhu Khanna a very big hand.
Hello, good morning everybody. Namaskar. Well, I'm really overwhelmed to be here, and I want to begin by thanking Dr. Verma, who's a father figure and a guide and a mentor to me. We met about 3 years ago when I was the director of the Center for Comparative Religion, and it was quite amazing. The moment he started speaking, I realized that this was going to be a friendship which is going to last for a long time. And I must confess that as a scholar of religious studies, I never took this whole business of interfaith very seriously. I'm being very honest to you. I must confess. For the simple reason that, we do textual work, we do anthropological work, we do sociological work, and somehow what happens in the field, we tend to forget as academics. So Dr. Verma's forums have opened up my eyes, and I bow down to you for that. And I want to be integrated into this conversation and discourse, and that is why I'm here. Now, I want to make my presentation short, and my presentation today is going to be qualitative. We've heard about the quantitative dimension of what's happening to women. They are beaten, and we are going through all kinds of exploitation. But nari hu main, bechari nahi hu main, lachari nahi hu main. The fact that I'm a woman, I am empowered. And I want every woman to say that every moment of their life. Because I represent the Tantras. And in Tantra, every woman, irrespective of her caste, class, status, is a Shakti. The mere fact that she's born a woman, she's a Shakti. We don't need institutions to tell us that we are empowered. And that is really the subject of my talk today. What I want to really emphasize is that which aspect of femininity is powerful? Which aspect of femininity, our femininity, we should employ for peace building or for creating our own spaces in society? I mean, you can employ that strength anywhere. So that is going to be a short presentation that I want to give. So it's going to be totally qualitative. Now, I was very happy to note in all our conversations that we've had yesterday that the root problem is the ethical challenge is to build an ethical society. You know, unless we can build an ethical society and ecologically sensitive society, I would say, we cannot resolve any problem that is around us. So when we talk of ethics, obviously women have a very major role to play because they constitute half the sky. We don't have to look at that as the quantitative dimensions. So what can you show the first slide, please? Hey, somebody was, where is, can you please put on show the first slide, please?
You were supposed to show the slides.
Right. Okay, so basically the first thing I want to say is that what are the critical feminine resources that we have? Now we are aware that male dominance is there everywhere, and it's a single sex which has dominated all through history. That is why feminism took root. Okay. So male dominance is to be replaced by a model of equal partnership. That can you do this? What you were doing? Okay. So male dominance. Firstly, the first point I want to make is that male dominance is to be replaced by a model of equal partnership between men and women. Because all this while we have been dominated by a single. Yes, please put it on. Role of women in peace. So in other words, what we find in the social sphere is that gender is not a neutral political category. Who decides the political agenda? It's the men. Who are the key players? Key players in society are always men. And women must defy this stereotype. Yeah, it's given here. So male dominance is, women must defy that. Their stereotype roles which has been given to them by society and strive for autonomy. Because all through history we've seen that women have played marginal roles and they have no voice to shape an egalitarian or democratic future. And I'm sure many of the panelists here will be talking about human rights. So the first thing is, that we've got to create a model of equal partnership. And unless that model is acceptable, women cannot really generate the response that we want them to generate. Okay? How do you... So in other words, male dominance to be replaced by a model of equal partnership, and equality should be political and personal, even at the family level. Reinscribe the structure of power base in our society to work for a common goal for peace. And women have been excluded from the discourse of peace, must be included in all forms of dialogue as well as practice. Not just dialogue, not just to get a handful of brilliant women, on the dais and let them talk. But every woman, the grandmother, the child, the kanya, all women should be brought into the social sphere to work for peace. Okay, now why do I say this? Obviously, why am I saying that femininity should play a very major role? I'm saying this because we have to understand the moral force of mother love, Matri Sadbhav, which is found in all the religions of the world. In the Durga Saptashati, it is stated that there can be a wicked son Kumata kadachit na bhavet. They can never be a wicked mother.
That is kuputro jaye tak
Yes.
pachati kumata.
Yes, absolutely. So the idea that there is Matri Sattva or the moral force of mother love is so powerful and is found in all religions. Because mother is the first and the most valuable school in life. The symbol of motherhood is synonymous with perpetual love, eternal love. When we think of love, we think of our mother and then we think of the father. We may think of both, of course. Oh, we have only 2 minutes. Okay, so it's all here. Mother values precedes actual birth. The mother is the first and the most valuable school in life. The mother school, the best school. Mother provides the ethical foundation of society. And so what we have to do is really to reclaim what I call the legacy of the feminine cultural values. And also feminine religions, which unfortunately I can't talk about it right now because time doesn't permit me. But I want to talk about feminine values, and feminine values were used as a tool for India's freedom by Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi, in one of his wonderful works, N.K. Bose, in his book My Days with Gandhi, refers to the feminization of Gandhi's personality. Through the adoption of maternal role of a nurturer. It is by becoming a woman that he, Gandhi, tried to circumvent one of the most powerful and disturbing elements which belong to our biological existence. Gandhi felt that by inculcating the feminine in himself, he would ultimately release a passive force that would prove a perfect foil to the conventional strengths of malehood rooted in aggression. Now this is what it is. And these feminine values are linked with the nurturing quality, a woman as a caretaker, patience and forbearance, tolerance and honesty, respect for elders, compassion, communality and mutuality, gentleness and modesty, all the values that we need for peace. We don't need brutal force, we don't need gentle, beautiful, loving. You know, we know about the Guru who's a hugging mother. Just by hugging, she's passing.
Madhuji, you already taken 12 minutes.
Okay, now I'm concluding
Request
now.
you to please wind up.
Yes, I'm winding up. So in other words, encourage participation in engaged religions for peace building by introducing universal values of world's religions like ahimsa, maitri, karuna, tawhid, etc., which are feminine values. Okay. So in other words, I want to end by saying that we don't have to validate our feminineness or shaktihood because we are shakti. नारी हूँ मैं, लेचारी नहीं हूँ मैं, बेचारी नहीं हूँ मैं, क्योंकि नारी हूँ मैं. तो ये अगर आप याद रखिएगा, तो आप you can go on building peace in the whole globe. Thank you very much.
Professor Madhu raised some very essential and important issues. Firstly, she complimented and thanked Dr. Verma for having got us onto this stage. I am also similarly been inspired by him to come onto this stage.
Thank you, sir.
A few issues that she raised is something that India has been born with. In India, we always recognize woman as the supreme Shakti. The concept that she raised, that from male dominance we must shift to equality, is something that was brought out loud and clear to the world about 2 years back by an Indian geneticist working in UK. She said since both husband and wife work, in the times to come, in the next 3 to 5 years, through very minimal gene modification, all males will be able to breastfeed the child and share responsibilities with the ladies equally. Shortage of time does not permit me to speak more on this issue. Maybe towards the end I will cover some other aspects. I now invite Dr. Hema Raghavan to enrich us with her views. Dr. Hema ji is a former Dean at Delhi University and Principal of Gargi College, University of Delhi. During her stewardship, Gargi College received the prestigious UGC award of being a college with potential for excellence. She has a daunting list of very many other national and international awards. She is a prolific writer, has published 2 books. Besides, she is a very active participant in national and international seminars. Ladies and gentlemen, do give a big hand.
You want to mention of your research work? Your research work.
10 minutes, please.
Yeah, going to be the meeting. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the dais,
You little inaudible.
Oh, sorry. Right. That means I am technologically backward. Right. Since the time is very limited, I have to say that I have introduced myself with an additional qualification. Thanks to Professor Madan Mohan Verma, I am one of the senior fellows of IASC Rajasthan, Deemed University Rajasthan, and I have just completed under his guidance my work, and the work is called To Deny Religion Its Nothingness. So that's the one that is going to be accepted by the university. So much for self-introduction. I've chosen, the main theme of Global Peace Leadership Conference, and specifically I have chosen the title Role of Women in Peace Building Process, which means, just as what Professor Madhu Khanna has said, that I am looking at this as an attempt to empanel women as the leaders of global peace. I am very carefully using the word empanel because it is in the sense of including women rather than giving them the sole privilege in peace building process. I have to say that I am not a militant feminist, that's why I have chosen the role of women in peace. And I am a modern feminist, and just as Professor Madhu Khanna has just now said, that men and women are 2 sides of the same coin of humanity, and both of them have to work together in tandem rather than any one having the greater privilege to ensure that peace and harmony comes into the world. I'm going to start on a very light note. It is not something, women as peacemakers is not something, a very new concept. It has been there a long time back, and as long as 411 BC, 2500 years ago, Aristophanes wrote a very rip-roaring comedy called Lysistrata. And Lysistrata is about a Greek woman who exhorts all other women of Greece, saying that our men are always fighting interstate war, and let us bring about peace. And the only solution she gave was, come, from today onwards, we shall refuse to bed with men, and we will deny them all sexual privileges. And the men were brought to their knees, and it's a rip-roaring comedy which I myself have produced for my students, and that was one that brought about it 2,500 years back. Many wars have been fought since Aristophanes' time, and only very, very brief spells of peace have been there in the major parts of the world. One of the very interesting things that when this topic I was thinking about, it is an independent kind of a thought, that most of the decisions about war are made by men. But there have been 3 notable exceptions. One, Indira Gandhi, who piloted the Bangladesh Liberation War, Margaret Thatcher, who won the Falklands War, and Golda Meir, who found herself responsible for making major military decisions during the 1973 Israel-Arab War. But what is noted is not that the women initiated the war, but in all the 3 cases, all the 3 women at the helm of the respective nations negotiated and opted for peace at the end of a decisive war. Mrs. Gandhi, we all know, signed the agreement of bilateral relations between India and Pakistan. She did not go all out to press on with war and finish off Pakistan. She wanted peace to be restored between the 2 countries, and 93,000 soldiers, Pakistani soldiers, were released by Indira Gandhi. And that was a photo Indira Gandhi negotiation. Similarly, Golda Meir could have pressed the nuclear button, nuclear strike, a preemptive nuclear strike against the Arabs, but she said, no, I do not know how many young men and young women will die as a result of that. And she refrained from doing that. And Mrs. Thatcher, we all know, she went against the general opinion. She went to war with Argentina. even though everyone said it will prove a disastrous one. And at the end of the war, it was she negotiated the formula which which is called the sovereignty umbrella, and established a framework within which further talks on matters of mutual interest could be held. So after the war, Britain granted the islanders British citizenship and strengthening the link between the islanders and the UK. All the three women I have mentioned demonstrated the coexistence of the steely and soft sides. It is another thing that hostilities continue even today between India and Pakistan, between Israel and Palestine, mutual relationship between Britain and Argentina. But I'm sorry to say, though there are a large number of men here, I would say it's not off my mark that women initiated the peace move and men continue to torpedo it. In India, as Professor Khanna had already pointed out, the veneration of Durga as a goddess of Shakti and power, to fight against atrocities committed on women, against rape, violence, against human activities. This is called, and also against the destruction of nature and ecological imbalance, is an acknowledgement of the power of women known as Nari Shakti. But India, unfortunately, and this is true of the rest of the world, has stopped with the symbolic worship of women and never given women the role as warriors to lead the fight against injustice and as crusaders to usher in peace and harmony. War is seen as man's exclusive domain, and women are seen to have neither the mental nor the physical strength to enter. Women are not even included to negotiate peace and are relegated to being passive, suffering victims of war, violence, and savagery. Now, everyone has said it, yes, we constitute one half of the population and we are equal stakeholders in all matters relating to economic, social, political, and international issues. All matters relating to human development will start only with peace. If there is no peace, there will be no human development. But at the same time, we also know that the world cannot enjoy peace all the time. As human beings, we are genetically wired to conflict. As long as there is an I, and as long as there is a you, there is going to be bound to be conflict. The conflict can be religious, economic, social, gender, or environmental. And I think I quote Ronald Reagan, it was one of the best quotations that I've come across. Peace is not absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. That was a brilliant statement by Ronald Reagan. And I feel women are genetically better equipped to handle conflict without restoring to counter-violence.
One moment. One moment.
Oh, no, I think that is human power. That is human power.
Fine.
Now, peace has got, I just have to, I rush through. Peace is both negative and positive. Negative peace is the absence of fear of violence, while positive peace consists of 8 things: a well-functioning government, that is administration, sound business environment, equitable distribution of resources, that is social equity, acceptance of the rights of others, human rights, free flow of information, media, good relations with neighbors, international policies, high levels of human capital, economic development, low levels of corruption, ethical values. These are the things that we need. And we find that in all the research that has been done on positive peace index, it has been affirmed that the high peace countries have higher per capita income, more equitable distribution of resources, better health and education outcomes, improved trust between citizens, greater social cohesion, and a better ecological mood. I come very quickly to the point that why is it that women are better equipped to bring about peace? The thing is that in all cases of violence and savagery, women and children are the ones who are the victims. And we find that they experience tremendous suffering, not only in terms of suffering for their children, suffering for their husband, suffering for the family. And this is something that as a woman I can say, the knowledge and analysis of human suffering is experienced by women, and then it is this. When you experience suffering, you get strength. It is this that gives women the power to enter into the situation, feelings, thoughts, and difficulties of the entire suffering humanity and work for a peaceful solution to end all hostilities. Since the time is at the last thing that I would like to have finished with that. And one of the things that I have to say, because it is the kind of conference that I have, that the United Nations has really rewarded many women for the significant steps that they have done towards peace. And among the 15 women who have been awarded since 1905, they include Mother Teresa, Aung San Suu Kyi, Jodie Williams, Shirin Ebadi, for the non-violent struggle for the safety of women and for women's rights. The conferring of the Nobel Awards on these women acknowledge the potential of women towards freeing the world of violence and hatred and promoting peace, democracy and human rights. And the last thing is what Professor Khanna has said. I'm just taking it out, Professor Singh. It will be appropriate to conclude this paper with a reference to Ardhanarishvara, an Indian concept of an androgynous deity of Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati, representing the synthesis of the masculine, that is the Purusha, and the feminine, that is the Prakriti. The Ardhanarishvara represents the cosmic energy of a constructive and generative power. And when you look at the Ardhanarishvara concept, we can truly say if the men are from the Mars, they will have to be complemented by the women from Venus to foster and sustain peace on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Himaji. That was indeed a very distinguished presentation. Due to shortage of time, I would not be able to say very much, but except for the fact that Margaret Thatcher was essentially not a peacemaker. I wish to mention to you, if you've seen a BBC movie called The Islamic Bomb, she wanted to join hands with India to carry out a nuclear strike on Pakistan to stop Pakistan in their trades. It was the government of India which negated it. So hence to say that she was a peacemaker would be a heresy. It is India, always and every time, which has been at the forefront of peacemaking.
I only say that women can fight, women can also negotiate. That's the thought.
I would now request to come on to the dais and address the audience. He is a PhD from Aligarh Muslim University and is presently chairman of Institute of Objective Studies, New Delhi. He has had several prestigious assignments in Saudi Arabia and has been the chief coordinator for translation of meaning of Holy Quran in different languages. He has written frequently on issues concerning Islam and Muslims and has presented papers in several seminars at the national and international levels. Gentlemen and ladies, do give him a big hand.
Thank you very much.
May I request you to please finish it in 9 minutes. Both the ladies have taken 3 to 4 minutes extra.
I have to add all the 3 4 together. Okay, can you give me a glass of water? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nasalli ala rasulihil kareem. I'm beginning in the name of Allah, who is the most merciful, and the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who is also the merciful hope for the whole world. The theme has been given, the role of women and youth in peace building process. I haven't listened to our predecessors, whatever the talk has gone, only they except few lines when Madam Hima Raghavan was talking. Time is allotted 9 minutes. I hope that 1 minute I will give to the chairman. I will finish with it.
Thank you very much. Honored.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I will be talking about the most practical aspects, not the theoretical at all. Theoretically, specifically I can say it is the intellectuals, it is the leaders in different walk of life, it is the leaders of the different faiths can sit together in a beautiful hall, in air conditions. They may discuss about the various issues and problems. All the discussion may be very, very good. It will also be very good in listening and in talking. But let us see where the problem lies. And that problem is created by whom? Perhaps I will be called by you all it is the we, great scholars. It is the we, the leaders, making the points how to defend ourselves, how to fight ourselves, how to lead the discord in the society. It is not the common man who is doing this because they are followers. It is the we who do not try to find out what are the common elements in every faith and every religion, every ideology, and how to make it practical. For example, there are a lot of statesmen are coming, very poisonous, full of discriminations, full of hate, and we, the intellect, I'm saying we, those who are intellectuals who are sitting over there, we do not dispute except giving some statements. Have we thought of that we can go together to meet the leaders of different communities who are making the discord as a collective of the different religious leaders to discuss about how to make harmony and coexistence? I never found. Most of the time we found from one place to another having a good program, good seminar, good workshop, but not to intermingle with the various kind of leaders who are really disturbing the whole world, including India. Unless we do not plan, it cannot. As far as the women is concerned, there is another philosophical debate. It was started from the West, not from the East. In the East, every religion, every faith believes men and women are complementary to each other. They cannot live in isolation and in distance. For example, with the great sister Hema, I'm not questioning, I'm putting one point over there. A girl, maybe 17 years, 18 years, and is very bold physically. When she became pregnant, she is always in need of support from his husband, from his father, from his everyone. She cannot carry without the proper support from the family. And that is the full of complementary to each other. They are sharing the views, sharing their burden, sharing their pain. But after 45 years of the real experiences, how to tackle the discord, how to tackle the issues, how to tackle the conflict. But we, as a whole human beings in India also, do not give the chance to the women after 45 years to play this kind of role. Because she has suffered, she understands, and she was not given the proper chance. So this is a complimentary, not to say that we are equal in a sense that just to fight each other in the name of women. No. There is no point about the youth. I don't find much youth, but we can consider everyone is youth. Because some people say that it is not the physics, but it is the mind. So from the mind point of view, maybe we all are youth. But one of the important aspects of youth, they can change the trends of the time. They can change the tides of the water if they are convinced. It is we have to transform our knowledge and experiences to youth so that they should take the challenge and to go into the ground fields to remove this kind of misunderstanding, to make the country strong on the basis of confidence, faith, and the basis of the Constitution. I will conclude. In our Constitution, we forget our preambles of the Constitution. Our preamble says very clearly that justice, equality, liberty, fraternity. Who disturbing these four elements? If these four elements will be taken in a proper form, then this kind of disturbance will not come. We, the silent majority, whenever disturbance comes, we remain in our own slumber. We do not join hands together to go into the field to remove this. After, if we go together, the peace building will be made automatically. Thank you very much.
Sisters of humankind. Began your deliberation with brothers and sisters. You know, very interestingly, you raised an issue that any deliberations that are carried across the globe in air-conditioned environments invariably don't get followed through. Hence, we continue to remain where we are. I wish to mention to you, had Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad, Gautam Buddha, and Guru Nanak not walked the earth, humankind would have been poorer. It is unfortunately that after they left the scene, millions of people the world over have been slaughtered in their names. So hence we all know it is not the common man that he said needs to be blamed. It is those who are misinterpreting the message of the Messiah. I will leave it at that. I will now call upon the next panelist, Professor Dipali Banot. She has been an associate professor and head of Department of Sanskrit in Janki Devi College, University of Delhi, and has been a consistent contributor in the interfaith movement. She has presented several papers at various national and international forums. Ladies and gentlemen, please do give Professor Dipali Banot a very big hand. Dipali ji, 8 to 9 minutes.
Okay, sir. Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Shantirupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namah. I bow to that divine female energy who exists in every being in the form of peace. Good morning, esteemed peace lovers. I am really honored to be here, and again I would like to thank and express my gratitude to Professor Verma for having helped me into coming and participating in this conference, and I am really being enriched by it. Much has been said about how women who have been caught in the midst of conflicts, whether it is communal, political, or of any other nature, it's only the women who understand peace more than the others, because it is the women and children who are the most vulnerable and suffer the most in conflict situations. Women who survive physical, sexual, and mental violence inflicted on them during the conflict have to also endure the trauma of losing their dear ones, apart from being robbed of a dignified livelihood. Thus, their experiences of violence in any conflict situation is different from that of the men. Yet, during the conflicts and after the conflicts are over, it's only women who play an active and an effective role in bringing about a peaceful situation, both at home and around them, because women are also great healers. In post-conflict situations, it is the women who, despite their pain and suffering, are the most active agents of peace in all communities. Societies have survived because of the various efforts made by women to keep the family and the community in peaceful conditions. But their contributions to the restoration and maintenance of peace remains invisible and unrecognized in patriarchal societies. Even in non-conflict situations across the globe, women play a very important role as peacemakers in their families and in situations that surround them. And I think each one of us will vouch for that. Whenever there is a conflict within the family, at the micro level, we always know that it is the woman who creates peace within the family. And then at the macro level, it is her work that brings about peace. Much has been said about mothers as teachers, because women are generally deeply religious and are known to be peaceful by nature. As mothers and teachers, they transmit the core values of head and heart to their children and families. Their ability to reach out to women and other communities, and faith groups is unique. Hence, their contribution towards peace building cannot be undermined. As emphasized in the Platform for Action of the United Nations 4th World Conference on Women in 1995, it was said, while entire communities suffer the consequences of armed conflict and terrorism, women and girls are particularly affected because of their status in the society and their sex. The general exclusion of women from decision-making positions during and following violent conflicts reinforces their victimization. I'm not going to discuss with you what should be done, but I'm going to share with you a few learning experiences that I have learned in my experiences of working with women. As a member of an interfaith organization, I've been conducting interfaith women's journeys and exposure visits for women from different faith groups to visit conflict-affected areas that have witnessed violent, communal violence, and have been meeting with women who are rebuilding their lives in those conflict areas. Quickly, I will talk to you about Bhubaneswar, Alkund, Nuagaon in Bhubaneswar. This has witnessed a major communal conflict in Hindus and Muslims in that area. It started off in 1935 when the Muslims objected to Hindus doing kirtan outside the mosque while they were performing namaz, and this led to a lot of conflict. The matter went to court. For 20 years it languished in the court. Then there was a Muslim judge who gave this verdict that both the communities have the right to pray and do the kirtan as they wish. And we met the women in that village, and we found, despite the underlying tensions, it was the women who had come together in both the villages. Hindu and Muslim families were coming together because of the efforts made by women. And they chose, instead of talking about peace, they chose common topics which affect everybody. There can be no peace if there is hunger. There can be no peace if there is injustice. So these women are working around the issues of health, around the issues of pension, around the issues of self-help groups and economic empowerment. These are the things which galvanize women together. And men are now looking at these women for creating this model of peace. We visited Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and we went to Gomtipura, which was the eye of the storm, and this area has witnessed violence again and again. First time, 1967, the first communal riot took place. Second, during Babri Masjid demolition, and the worst was in 2002, as we all know. And there are local religious interfaith groups who are working in this area to bring about peace, but it was very heartening to see Muslim, Hindu, and Christian community women sitting in a tiny village, in a tiny hut. You know, I am not talking about big suspended things that people talk about, how people in the negotiating table are talking. These are down-to-earth women negotiating peace, and we do not know about them. And these are the women who are going to usher in peace. So whereas on one hand the women narrated the horror tales of the riots, they also spoke of how people across communities reached out to each other in moments of great tension, suspicion, and fear. And what they are doing now are teaching their little children, all of the communities, to involve, they are involving the children in games to bring about a sense of greater friendship and respect to each other. And I think this is a small, they're educating the children and teaching them the values of interfaith understanding and respect for others. We visited Nakuru, Kenya, about 60 kilometers from Kenya, and there we found there was this bitter battle between two tribal communities. And after the conflict is over, now the women have come together across the conflicting groups and they are rebuilding their lives. If you see that place, there is utter poverty, but the joy and the joy that the women have in working together was so much that there was one policewoman from the United Nations peacekeeper, one of the blue helmets, and she said, we have been posted here for peacekeeping, but I think we cannot be better peacekeepers than that. And that spoke volumes of how women can do it. We went to Colombo and we also visited the area called Kokadu. There are so many things I would have liked to share with you, but due to paucity of time, I will just say, and here it was, the Tamilians and the Sinhalese. This area was the Litte stronghold where Tamilians and Sinhalese had a bitter conflict. But here, as a result of this long conflict, there are a number of widows in this village, but people have got together, put up a post-trauma counseling center for women, and women are rebuilding their lives, they're getting educated. So we found education and health were the two major issues which bring people together. The women here were mostly involved in agriculture, and some of them had their own land, but they were now working together to bring up home gardening, planting groundnuts, tapioca, doing fishing together, and training, sewing, tailoring. And these were the things which had brought two communities, the two conflicting groups together. But the best story I got was from the Oslo Forum in Norway last year, where I got the background paper called Getting to the Point of Inclusion, 7 Myths Standing in the Way of Women Waging War. And it was placed by, the paper was co-authored by Alice Nagaritu, co-chair of UVENU Platform for Peace, and she was also the Commissioner of National Cohesion and Integration, Kenya. And Jacqueline O'Neill, Director of the Institute for Inclusive Security. The paper begins with an incident. In early 2008, and I quote, in early 2008, Kenyan streets were filled with people wielding machetes wet with the blood of their political rivals and those ethnically different from them. Kofi Annan sat with Kenya leaders negotiating peace as death and destruction raged around them. On the outskirts of Nairobi, the Kibera slum was one of the theaters of the seemingly endless violence until a 15-year-old girl was killed. She died with people around her, including a photographer documenting her last moments. Among those watching was the previously unknown Jane Anyango, who was galvanized into action by the girl's death. she moved from door to door, mobilizing women in protest. In less than 2 hours, Ms. Anyango and a friend had 200 women marching, chanting for the fighting to end and pulling men they knew off the streets. The nation was divided on tribal, political and religious grounds. Yet, when we called for women to join us, nobody cared with the community we were from. Women came, despite the fact from which community, which tribe, which group they came from. Her group took the name of Kibera Women of Peace and Fairness and grew to include a large number of women working toward a common goal. Convincing male relatives to stay clear of violence. The group sent a message to the wives of the Prime Minister and the President. Talk to your husbands to end the conflict. We have got our men off the streets. This is a message they gave to the Prime Minister and the President's wives. The women created an inter-ethnic platforms, and during 2013 elections, Ms. Anyango and her colleague patrolled Kibera in pairs. If they saw a man demonstrating, they called his wife, aunt, mother, girlfriend or daughter to get him off the street. No security force could have used these tactics. No political party could have quite have the same effect. The women of Kibera took charge of peace and security agenda, that these bridging ethnic divides that men still find hard to negotiate. While Kofi Annan was negotiating, these women had got peace. So I think this is an example. Instead of what we should do, we should find real examples, talk about it, and celebrate this. And just now, my senior colleague talked about the list, about depriving the men of conjugal rights. Recently, in Sudan, I read this in the Times of India, October 28th, last month. They said, in South Sudan, the women have also started a nationwide sex strike to end the country's civil war. And a key suggestion was to mobilize all women in South Sudan to deny their husbands conjugal rights. Sudan is doing it. And apart from that, the UN Security Council has brought about many instruments like the UN CSR 3025, etc., etc. So in conclusion, I can just say, where men are willing to kill and die, willing to kill each other and die for the nation's or community's honor, the women are willing to live for the children, for the families, and for peace to prevail. And in the bargain, they are not averse to reaching out to women of other communities.
Several areas of India, and also you covered how this is being tackled the world over in various countries in Africa and elsewhere. Be grateful to you. I am sure the generation next to sitting here pick up ideas from here, and given their optimism and given their positivity, they will definitely turn things around for the betterment of humankind. As regards a very interesting statement that you said, that women's role in the family is paramount. In a lighter vein, I totally agree with you. I've been married for 44 years. I've maintained my smile for...
Don't be in the lighter mood, be on a serious note, it's the women.
No, I said, I maintained my smile for 44 years. Obviously, the woman sitting here takes the credit. Then you said, women are the ones who impart qualities of head and heart, which are of vital consequence to their children. I was in the field from the time my daughters were in class 8 to the time they finished their education. Both my daughters topped the Delhi University and are now operating at the global level. Once again, it is the efforts of the woman and not that of the man. So I totally agree with you. Women are a phenomenal contributor. The sooner mankind, particularly men folk, realize this, there will be peace all around. We are running terribly short of time. Next speaker of ours is going to be from Nepal, Mrs. Ganga Devi Gurung. She is the chairperson, Institute of Human Rights Communication, Nepal, and like most of our panelists, has participated in several deliberations in Nepal, India, and elsewhere in the world. She works for the security of women, youth and children. We look forward to an amazing presentation by her. 10 minutes please, maximum.
Thank you, sir. Namaste to everyone. Well, I'm just presenting my organization, Erican and its work. Erican is the Institute of Human Rights Communication Nepal. Erican is a social, non-governmental and non-profit organization established by a group of women journalists in 2000. Erican focuses on peace and security of women and children. It is making aware them on their basic fundamental rights and empowering them to use their rights in a positive and constructive way. Erican monitors the media and advocates in favor of the people and organizations whose rights are violated by media sector itself. Erican conducts research, advocacy and provides the training to the media people, social activists and other interested ones for the establishment of sustainable peace in conflict-affected zones by running peace education program. Women human rights defenders. Erican conducts innovative and high-profile advocacy campaigns and endeavors to bring positive changes to human rights and peace-related issues, particularly focusing on the rights of women and children. Till that, Erican has trained 80 women human rights defenders. So NewsDesk has its own rules and process to finalize the news in order to publish in the media. Women human rights defenders' contribution is crucial. Working in critical situations can disseminate the news regarding the violation of women and children's rights and the actions taken to promote and secure the rights that could surely be the appropriate matter for the media. Erican, along with media professionals, believe that 18 women human rights defenders active in 4 districts, this is the working districts of Erican, Dolka, Rametap, Sinduli and Sira, are reliable sources of information to the media houses because women human rights defenders have first-hand experiences on various forms of violence against women in the remote areas, and they are engaged in ensuring justice to the victims. And we produce those informations to the media. Also, we produce the monthly media report, which we distribute in the media houses. Another work of Erican is Men Engage Alliance Nepal, because Erican is the secretariat of Men Engage Alliance Nepal now. Men Engage Global Alliance formed in 2004 with the general goal of working as partners to promote the engagement of men and boys in achieving gender equality. Men Engage Nepal developed its first strategy in 2007. The Men Engage partners are working collectively and individually towards fulfillment of the Millennium Development Goals, particularly on gender equality. This alliance works through sharing information and experience, organizing advocacy events and rallies at different levels. Men Engage Alliance members speak to engage men and promote advocacy around a number of key themes as gender directly affects the lives of men, women and third gender. So Men Engage Alliance exchanges ideas, produces joint statements and carries out joint advocacy activities for the gender equality. In this scenario, the second National Symposium on Engaging Men and Boys for Gender Equality in Nepal was organized in Kathmandu on 26 and 27 June 2014. The 2-day symposium offered mandate and assigned for the preparation of the new strategic plan of the Alliance for next 3 years, August 2014 to August 2017, which is already prepared. Similarly, Global Men Engage Alliance has organized its second global symposium in New Delhi on November 10 to 13, 2014. So, up to now, these positive indicators are concept of men engaged relatively new. sedate and confusing terms, but still we have some positive indicators. Health situation of women improved, domestic works of women recognizing, discrimination between girls and boys reducing, enrollment of the daughters in the schools and the pass on class percentage improving, sharing of the work in the kitchen in case of office bearers couples at some points.
Okay, 2 more minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you all.
That's indeed very kind of you. We're grateful to you for having made an amazing presentation. I agree with her on one issue, that unless and until we involve the civil society in a very major way, involve the social media, involve all forms of media, and use space-age connectivity and space-age communications, which enable us to reach instinctively and instantaneously to every corner of the earth at the same point of time, we will be failing in our duty of carrying forward the message to humankind at large. Had Gautam Buddha or had Emperor Ashoka the benefit of similar space-age connectivity, perhaps the world would have been a lot safer vis-a-vis what it is today. So the modern connectivity gives humankind an opportunity in about 10 to 15 to 20 to 30 years to usher in peace of the variety which the younger generation said, we shall overcome and we shall prevail and we shall succeed. We are all born with hope and optimism, and I am very certain we shall overcome all the problems. I now invite the last speaker, Dr. A.K. Marchant, General Secretary, Temple of Understanding and National Trustee of the Lotus Temple, Delhi. We got precisely 10 minutes to go for tea break. Apparently we got no time even for question answer or coming up. I would request you to kindly wind up within the
stipulated time. Yes, of course, I'll try my best and I'll justice. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, respected panelists, one of the big mysteries that I saw this morning was General P.K. Sehgal, who is a great friend of mine, good friend, General Vinod Sehgal. I'm a brother, he's a younger brother, and I was always wondering how similar you are to General Vinod Sehgal and why. So, while my paper is addressed to the subject of youth and leadership, but I'm equally at home when it comes to speaking about issues of women and women empowerment. I have 3 women in my home, and so much love and affection I've received from them that I just can't understand why a man has to behave in the way they are behaving today. My wife and my 2 daughters. So, ladies and gentlemen, as a Baha'i, we look at the process. You know, yesterday morning session was extremely stimulating, and the conceptual framework that Dr. James Flynn outlined in this brief PowerPoint presentation is the context that we need to look at if we want to make this world a better place for all of us to live and enjoy the wonderful gifts of the divine that have been bestowed in such plenteous measure on all human beings. But sad to say, civilization has to be placed in the framework, in a trajectory that is both evolutionary and revolutionary. And within this context, we must look at how religion as a system of knowledge and practice, and science as a system, again, of knowledge with technology has helped civilization move forward. So if the religion that you profess brings superstitions, blind faith, burdens you with a whole lot of rituals of tradition, then surely you need to ask yourself that in this 21st century, how much of it is relevant? And how much of this baggage should I continue to carry? How much of it is expired and needs to be set aside? Likewise, if science produces technology that is basically weapons of mass destruction, then why should we have that kind of science? A human being implies the masculine and the feminine, the male and the female. How can you exist otherwise? So these are very basic questions. In fact, I have a list of about 15 questions. If I were to ask them, then it would, of course, some of the answers have come from and panelists who have been part of this discourse since yesterday morning. As a Baha'i, we believe that we need to look at the process, because for us, the upheavals, the catastrophes, the conversions, the chaos, the confusion, all of it actually is a wake-up call for the entire human race, every man, woman, youth and child. That we cannot have business as usual. We cannot allow our leaders to take all the decisions for us, to spend $1.75 trillion on military. We cannot have all these multinational corporations and transnational corporations who by so many gimmicks are exploiting the whole world. Pharmaceutical companies make more profit selling vitamins, not life-saving drugs. All of these great industries and technologies, where is it leading us? When 80% of humankind, they live on the fringes. If you have a religion which is, say, for 1,450 years old, and you still tell me yesterday that I have not yet understood what my founder has told me after 1,450 years, then what am I to believe? If you have a religion which is 2,000 years old and has got divided into 2,000 different sects, and yet you tell me that I still don't understand what my founder taught to me about love and affection and harmony and peace, then what am I to say? If you have a civilization that claims to be 12,000 years old, with the oldest scripture, with such eloquence and power enshrined in it, and yet, when we meet in the streets, you behave like a savage animal. What kind of religion is that? What kind of civilization is that? What kind of way of life is that? So I'll conclude by just reading the abstract of my paper. As per Dr. Verma's commands, I obeyed it, I sent him the abstract, I sent him the paper. So this abstract of 238 words will sum up how the Baha'i approach to the role of youth as peace builders, as community developers, as the future leaders of humankind need to groom themselves. So please allow me the indulgence. Youth can move the world, and they will bring in a culture of service and peace in a world as a result of an interfaith awakening stemming from the collaboration and coordination of the two systems of knowledge, namely science and religion. For through science we obtain knowledge of the physical universe, and through religion, the knowledge of who we are and why we are here. By focusing on the 5 themes, namely the period of youth, what does it mean to be in a period of youth? The early adolescence, fostering mutual support and civilization, mutual support and assistance, youth and community building, contribution to the advancement of civilization. I have endeavored in my paper as a member of the Baha'i faith to share certain convictions and the vision of Baha'u'llah as the founder of the faith of a spiritually and materially prosperous world and peaceful society. The manifold responsibilities of social transformation upon the youth in every country who in the prime of their lives must steel themselves for a life of service to humanity. The younger generation of today must counter the negative social forces by relying upon a powerful divinity's unfailing assistance. For the present-day society, be it rural or urban, lives in fear and insecurity, and a host of crises that threatens the very survival of the human race. With clarity of vision and courage in their hearts, and a conviction of faith,
Born out of encounter with the divine, the youth must pledge to use their spiritual resources for the advancement of present-day society, whichever country they live in. And this paper elaborates, and it also gives certain practical examples. For instance, in India, we have the National Social Youth Service, we have the Nehru Yuva Kendra, we have something like 300 youth organizations, and all of them are doing good work. My spiritual sister earlier, Ms. Gaurav, shared an example of one of such organizations where the women issues are at center stage for them. And all the preceding panelists have also added many wonderful dimensions to enrich our understanding about the plight of humanity today and what is the way forward. So it is this kind of a positive framework that can help us to address the manifold crises of a world which is strangely disordered with profound confusions. So with these few words, I'd like to end. And about the women issue, two things I must say. What is the concept of power? And how can we reframe the concept of power and provide an expression where there is complete equality of the rights, privileges, prerogatives to women? It is not, we cannot just take one brush and brush everything and say that all these thousands of years women have always been at receiving end. Because if you study history right, there are many situations, many periods where women have performed outstanding and stellar roles, where women as the queen of a large empire have contributed tremendously. So those are also the instances. Unfortunately, the men, because of a little bit extra physical strength, thought that they are superior, which is an absolute fallacy. At the same time, I believe that unless and until women are given their full rights, we will never have peace. If women are in the forefront of every department of human activity, surely peace is within our reach. And peace for me is inevitable. It only depends whether it's going to be this generation or the next generation. Because we are not the creators of this universe or the planet. There are other divine forces also at work. And if we tap those forces in a rightful manner, surely we human beings who are the acme of creation, the finest of all creation, the Ashraful Makhluqat, can solve our problems. So long as there is a paralysis of will, we will continue to be the way we are and end up in a major catastrophe which will threaten the very survival of our existence on this planet. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, the next session starts at 11:45. So I am afraid I may not entertain any questions. I just wish to make one or two statements. Today is the Human Rights Day. It's the United Nations Human Rights Day. I do not know whether it is by coincidence or through design that this day was chosen by the Global Peace Foundation, India Interfaith Foundation and IAC for concluding this session. One Indian and one Pakistani won the Global Peace Prize this year. One working for women education, Malala of Pakistan, and Satyavarti, Kailash Satyarthi, working for the underprivileged labor class children of India. So there are lots and lots of people the world over, both from the generation next and the present generation, working for the upliftment of women and children the world over. My profuse thanks to all the panelists for having put across their views with such conviction and with such fervor and rare passion that we all of us here actually owe a lot to them for the contribution that they made for the successful conclusion of technical session 4. The next session, technical session 5, commences at 11:45 tea is laid outside on the left. Please be seated by 11:45 so that the next session can start on time. Thank you very much. No, we can speak outside. We are all available.
Right of their rights to answer.
Related to women empowerment. Only one question related to women empowerment.
I think we can do this discussion during the tea session when we are having tea. So thank you so much. Our chair already announced we have a tea, and from here is the left side. We will go there and we have a tea. That's a very short break. So I have just one simple announcement for the parallel session going in the Willow Hall. Those speakers, if you are here in the Willow Hall, please receive over there. So I will just announce those speakers. This session is chaired by the Professor Satish Saxena, and the speakers are there is Andreen, and then Anu Sharma, Veru, Dr. Chindal, Dr. Satyamurthy, Niharika, White Mission, Professor K.K. Sharma, C.K. Bhardwaj, Dr. Mohan Charan, Manjur Ujala, Sangeeta Sharma, Alka. So they are going to speak over there in another session. Thank you.